Good evening. Thanks very much for joining us. This is the first lockdown seminar delivered by Psychology at Lancaster University. My name's Padraig Monaghan. I'm not giving the talk. Lara Warmelink, my colleague, is giving the talk today. We're going to start in just a moment. The talk is about half an hour, and then we'll have some time for questions as well. So if you do have a question, thanks very much for joining us. If you do have a question, sorry about that. If you do have a question, and then type it into the Q&A part of the screen, and we will try to get through as many questions as possible afterwards. Now, I'll hand over to Lara. You might see that she used to have short hair during the lockdown. Her hair's grown a little bit. But half an hour now for Lara to talk to you about her research at Lancaster University in the Department of Psychology. Lara, are you there?
Okay. I'm going to get started on the bits I actually wanted to talk to you about. Thank you very much for coming. Padraig is monitoring the questions via the Q&A. So I can't respond to you directly right now, but if you post your question, Padraig will keep track of them and he'll ask them of me at the end of the seminar. So today I'm going to be talking to you about deception, the good of deception, the bad and the ugly. And I'd just like to point out that all of the images from the movie I have taken from a website that you can visit yourself if you wanted to, or if you just wanted to see the movie again, also possible. So I'm going to be talking about deception. About four things, really. I'm going to start by giving you a definition of deception and talk a little bit about how often people lie, because I think it's good when you talk about something to know what it is you talk about before you go into the detail. And then, as the title says, we're going to talk about good things. So, there's several deception definitions in the literature. So different psychologists have different ideas about what exactly is deception. I always use the definition by Vrij, who first published this in 2008, mostly because he was my PhD supervisor. So I am honor bound to forever abide by his definition of deception. But his definition of deception is this: a successful or unsuccessful deliberate attempt without forewarning to create in another a belief which the communicator considers to be untrue. Notice that the definition is that it is the communicator has to consider it to be untrue. It doesn't have to be untrue. It is possible to lie while still telling the truth at the same time. So if I think that the moon is made of green cheese. It's a silly belief, but go with me here. I believe that the moon is made of green cheese. And I say to somebody, well, I think the moon is made of solid rock. Then I'm lying, even though I'm also telling the truth, because I'm saying something which is against my own beliefs. So I'm saying something that is untrue to me, even though it is technically true. So that's an important part of that definition. Another important part of the definition is that it is a successful or unsuccessful deliberate attempt. So if you lie to somebody and they don't believe you, you've still lied to them. It doesn't matter whether it's a good lie, whether it's a convincing lie, whether it's a believable lie. A lie is a lie, whether or not it's believable. So then we come to the question of how often do people lie, or what I've called here deception prevalence. And you can understand maybe that that's quite a difficult question for a psychologist to answer. Because normally when people behave in a certain way, we've got sort of two ways to track how often they do it. We can watch them if we can see their behavior, or we can ask them how often they do it. But with deception, both of those methods are quite difficult, because a lie is about whether somebody says something that they don't believe. So you need to know what they believe in order to know whether they're lying. But in order to know what they believe, you have to ask them, and they might be lying to you about what they believe. So quite quickly you can see that things are getting uncertain or difficult to study. But Bella De Paulo and her colleagues back in the mid-90s made a sort of, I would say, a good first attempt. And they simply completed a self-report study. So they asked a whole bunch of people to walk around with a little diary and keep track of all the lies they told. Now, obviously, it might be the case that some people were lying in their diaries. And that's sort of a limitation of this study. There's nothing that Bella De Paulo and her colleagues could do about that. But if we assume for a second that people at least told us some bits of the truth, what people are telling us is still interesting. So even if people might be saying that they lie less than they really do, how often they're willing to tell Bella De Paulo that they're lying is giving us some information about what they believe. And what De Paulo found is that that students in her sample, so she used two kind of people in her study. She asked psychology students, and psychology students take part in a lot of psychology research all over the world. And she deliberately also asked people who weren't psychology students, so what she called adults or community members in her study. And she found in her study that students said that they lied about twice a day, and non-student adults said that they lied about once a day. So it's interesting to see that the students are saying that they're lying more than non-student adults. And what's important in this study is, although people are willing to admit in this study that they're lying regularly to people they know, they also say that their lies weren't serious. So these people are indicating that they're not going around, you know, trying to con little old ladies out of their hard-won savings. They're telling nice lies, good lies. And that's why I have that picture down there, because I'm going to talk later about non-serious lies, good lies. So Levine and Boster in 2010 did a very similar study. So they're basically just asking people, how often do you lie? And actually the mean numbers they found in that study were really quite similar to what De Paulo found 15 years earlier. So that's really nice, because at least if people are lying to us about how often they're lying to us consistently, and psychologists like that. It's nice when the data sort of matches up, even if we don't know whether it's exactly true. But one important point that Sirota, Levine and Boster point out is that people differ a lot in how they lie. So lots of people in their study, like over half of them, said that they don't tell lies at all in a particular day. They're just like, I haven't told any lies whatsoever. And quite a small part of their participants tell almost all of the lies that are told in the study. So 5% of their participants told half of their lies, and only 1% of their participants told almost a quarter of all lies. So there seems to be some sort of 1%ers going on here. Some people are just lying a lot. Or some people are keeping track of their lies better for the study than other people. That we don't know. But it's interesting, this sort of power relationship. So with a lot of psychology behavior, with lots of psychological behavior, you find that, you know, some people do it a lot and some people do it little, and sort of averages out. Not with lying. Some people lie a lot, some people don't lie at all. It's sort of an all or nothing system. And Devi and her colleagues back in 2015, they asked a very simple question of people. So they asked quite a lot of people. They stood in a museum and they said, how often have you lied in the last 24 hours? And they just asked people to give this really sort of crude estimate. And what you see is that the numbers people estimate are really, again, quite similar to what people told De Paulo, what people told Sirota, Levine and Boster, sort of about 1-2 lies a day. But you can also see that there's an age effect here. If you see this graph, if you see the x-axis says their age. So the sort of leftmost column is for children 6 to 8, and then the next column is for 9 to 12-year-olds, 13 to 17-year-olds, 18 to 29-year-olds, 30 to 44-year-olds, 45 to 59-year-olds, and then 60 plus. And you can see that for the kids, as they grow older, they tell more lies, or at least they claim in the study that they tell more lies. The lying goes up. But for the adults, the lying stays relatively constant, even goes down a little bit. There's quite a big drop between the 13 to 17-year-olds and the 18 to 29-year-olds. So we don't really know what's causing that. I'll get back to why children lie more, or why children, as they age, start telling more lies. But why this big drop to the 18-year-olds and why this sort of gentle decline as people age, we don't know. Now I want to talk about the good lies, because I like starting with good things. So when you think about lying and lie detection, a lot of the work that exists is coming from sort of bad lies, people assuming that lies are bad. And lots of people you know, we like people being honest. We think of ourselves as honest people. We want other people to be honest to us. We don't talk a lot about the good lies, the lies that we tell to make the world a better place. And that's why I wanted to start with that. Also because he comes first in the title of the movie, but, you know, hi-ho. So sometimes these good lies are known as white lies. And this is basically where deception is simply expected from society, where the person you're speaking to is expecting you to lie. And there are situations in which the deceiver sort of assumes that you're going to lie to them, and there are situations in which they don't. And if you think back to the definition of deception, there's a little bit of iffy, you know, what if the other people is assuming that you're going to lie to them? Are you really still lying to them? But let me give you an example. So you get situations where it is simply not socially acceptable to tell the truth. So if somebody comes to your birthday and they give you a lovely package and you open it and it's the ugliest poncho you've ever seen, you still have to say, thank you very much, I'm very happy with my home-knitted poncho. You simply cannot tell your lovely Aunt Dorothy, that is the ugliest poncho I've ever seen. It's just not cool. You just can't do that. You have to tell that lie. You could tell the truth, but very quickly you'd have no friends and Auntie Dorothy would no longer bring you presents on your birthday. It's just not what you do. But there's also situations in which people almost get stuck in this sort of socially acceptable thing where they say something and you say something that may or may not be a lie, but nobody cares. So it is estimated that the most told lie in the world right now is, I have read the terms and conditions. You've done this, you know, there's a bit of software, you want to download it, there's this whole thing about the terms and conditions, and you scroll down and then there's this tick box and you go, yes, I have read the terms and conditions. You haven't, nobody reads them, but everybody ticks the box. And that's a lie, because you are, even though you're not saying it out loud, you are trying to give other people the impression, a belief that you know isn't true. But then the question is, so this person you're telling this lie to, it's presumably the company that you're giving you're downloading this software from. Are they really expecting you to have read the terms and conditions? Because if it's really important to them that you read the terms and conditions, maybe they could have made the terms and conditions easier and shorter and easier for you to read, and then more people would read them. So the feeling is almost, well, they don't necessarily want you to read them. They're happy enough for you to lie about it. As long as you've said that you've read them, they're cool. So then you're lying to them, but they also sort of know that. So then you exist in this sort of strange social situation where you're sort of lying, but they sort of know. So then definitions get really, really sort of finicky. But if something happened to that software and you went to them and said, this is wrong, and they said, yeah, well, it was in our terms and conditions. And you said, well, of course, I haven't read the terms and conditions. They would say, well, you lied to us. So they would rely on that lie. They would point to you and say, well, you were lying to us. You told us you'd read the terms and conditions. So they don't care that you're lying until the moment that it is suitable to them to say that you're lying. So there's a real sort of complex social relationship there, and the lying makes that social relationship easier. Cole, back in 2001, looked at effects of deception in romantic relationships. And he had this result, or he found this thing, which I found really interesting ever since I first read it. Successful deception is associated with greater satisfaction in romantic partners. So the partners of people who lie to them are more happy in their relationship than the partners of people who don't lie to them. As long, and this is a big risk, as long as the partner never finds out that they're lying. Because if their partner finds out that they're lying, then their partner is less happy with their relationship. And this is, I think, quite a sort of crucial distinction of what lying does for us. Sometimes we have to lie to keep a relationship easy, to keep a relationship smooth. You give me a present, thank you very much. I'm not going to tell you the truth and say it's a horrible present. Our relationship is much better off if I just thank you sincerely and happily, and you can go off being proud of yourself that you got me such a nice present. If you figured out that I was lying to you, that I really hated that poncho, you'd feel betrayed. So there is a value to honesty, or there is a value to perceived honesty. There is a value to being considered an honest person, or there is a disvalue to being perceived as lying. You wouldn't like it if your friends lied to you, but you also wouldn't like it if your friends told you, you always give horrible presents, stop giving us those horrible home-knit ponchos. So it's a choice that people make, and different people make different choices. So people sometimes go for brutal honesty. I am one of those people. I've worked in lie detection too long. I tend to be quite brutally honest. And sometimes my friends don't like that. Sometimes my friends look at me and go, Lara, this is a moment where you probably should have lied. And some people, some people like that 5% of people you see in Sorota's study are just going, you know what? I'm just going to lie. I'm going to lie well. I'm going to take that risk. So, and there's a last sort of positive marker of deception, or a good lie. And these aren't really about deception being a good thing in and of itself. It's about deception being a sign of a good thing. So, and this happens when we look at developmental research, or we look at children aging. So we saw earlier with Debbie's study that as children age, sort of go from 6 to 8 to 9 to 12 to 12 to 17, the amount of lying they do increases, or at least the amount of lying they say they're doing increases. And this appears to be associated with children's developmental skills. So as children age, they get smarter. And as children age, they get more social, they get more polite. And deception is particularly associated with children's false belief skills. So one of the things that's really important for a child to learn is to understand that other people have their own minds, and that other people can think things that they don't know about, or that other people might not know things that they do know. And this is really quite a sort of complex bit of thinking that you have to do. And this is closely linked with children's ability to lie. I think you can understand that, because in a certain way, by lying, you're trying to get somebody else to believe something that you know not to be true. So in order to do that, you really have to understand that somebody else can also think things, that other people aren't just sort of robots that do things magically. But deception, so the ability to deceive and the ability to deceive successfully, can be quite a good marker for a child's false belief skills. It can also lead to very cute anecdotes of children failing miserably to lie successfully. So most children will develop their willingness to lie before they will develop the actual ability to do it convincingly. So if I can share a little story from when my sister was little, I'm still a little bit angry at her. My sister was 3 at the time, and she and I had gotten my father a present for his birthday, and we had hidden it in the house so he wouldn't find it beforehand. And I had coached her extensively not to tell my father. And this is an important part of how children learn to lie. So a lot of parents don't sit down and think, she can walk, she can put her own trousers on, now we have to teach her how to lie. But in reality, most parents do teach their children how to lie. Not so much by telling a child, well, this is how to lie convincingly, but by telling the child, you have to say this, or you don't have to say this. Oh, you've received a home knitted poncho. You should now say thank you, even if you don't think it. And if a child receives a home knitted poncho and says, it's ugly, we tell the child that they're not allowed to say that. So we're training children to lie, to be nice. So in this case, my sister was 3 and we'd hidden the present, and I told her, don't tell daddy about the present. Don't tell daddy about the present. And she nodded, very seriously, said, yes, I understand. I'm not going to tell daddy about the present. So my father comes home and he says, hello, how are you? What have you done today? And she replied with full enthusiasm, we did not go out and buy you a present. Well, my sister did exactly what I wanted her to do. But she also failed miserably, because obviously when she told my father, we did not go out and buy you a present, my father was like, well, they definitely went out to buy her a present. Like, she hadn't quite learned the value of silence yet. But this was a failure in her false belief. She hadn't quite realized. She had followed my instructions. She said, I have to say this, without having that belief and understanding of what I was thinking and what I wanted my father to think. So you can see that this is sort of very complex skill to have, this lying. And it requires quite a lot of background thinking, both in a sort of cognitive way and a sort of social way. And that's what makes it difficult, and that's what makes it harder for children to do it. And that means that as children age, as they get more socially advanced, as they get more cognitively advanced, they get better at it. And children tend to do stuff that they get better at, which is why they sort of lie more. But besides being associated with children's sort of skills, deception is also associated with children's belief that it is important that you're polite and that it's important that you're nice to other people. So children who care more about other people lie more to them because they don't want to be rude, because they understand that saying, this is a very ugly home-knitted poncho you've just given them, you're going to hurt their feelings, therefore I'm not going to say that. So in quite a sort of complex way, deception can be a positive behavior, or a behavior that makes your life and the life of other people around you easier. So now I want to talk about the bad things, bad lies. I'm not going to say that much about bad lies, just because there's so much of that you already understand. So a lot of deception is for selfish reasons. So the deception is used to purposefully gain something that the other person doesn't have yet. So almost all frauds underlie some form of deception. Fraud costs, 190 billion pounds. That's not a typo. I double checked. 190 billion pounds in the UK in 2017 alone. A lot of research on deception has been done from the point of view of police officers or intelligence agencies. So you can imagine that police officers have to deal with false denials of wrongdoing. So people who are suspected of a crime but say that they didn't do it. How do you know whether they're lying or not? False alibis is a sort of large area of research, lots of psychologists working there. There's also a lot of research being funded or being done by, intelligence agencies, the ones with like the all letter names and stuff like that, and they never tell you what happens. And they do a lot of research in intelligence gathering. So if people provide you information, how can you know that it's true? How can you know that it's true if you don't have access to the information they had themselves, if you can't double check? So that's where a lot of psychologists have studied and working. Obviously, there's a lot of negative deception going on in social relationships. So even if sometimes we lie to people just to make them feel better, a lot of time we lie to people just to get away with something or just to hurt people, stuff like that. And there's a whole field of lying in politics, which I'm not even going to discuss. There's people who've devoted their careers to lying in politics, but things just get too serious and you just want to hide on the table and not think about it again. So now I get to the ugly bit. You might have thought that the bad bit was already ugly, that sort of all of the sort of bad and deceptive and selfish lying that people do, that's ugly, and you could say so. But to me, when we talk about ugly, we talk about things when scientists or psychologists are not helping. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what psychologists have said about deception and about ways to detect deception. So a lot of work on psychology that psychologists have done on deception is to try and find good lie detectors, to find good lie detector machines. And in order to sort of understand how these sort of machines and techniques work, you have to understand that according to psychologists, there are sort of three main ways you can detect deception. So these three ways are first sort of described by de Paulo, Zuckerman, and Rosenthal back in 1981. And that's basically stress. So they're saying that liars are more stressed than truth tellers. Cognitive load. Cognitive load is a complex concept. It basically means how difficult something is. So psychologists believe that lying is harder than telling the truth. And the third is behavioral control. So that means that liars are trying to look like they're telling the truth. They're controlling their behavior deliberately in order to look more like a truth teller. And these three things might give you cues to deception. So if you could show that somebody is more stressed, or that somebody is finding a particular conversation difficult, or that somebody is trying to control their behavior, then you could say, well, those are cues that they're maybe lying. And there's basically two main ways in which people have detected deception sort of worldwide. And first is something called psychophysiology, which is using machines to look at people's bodily reactions. And there's cues. So this is when you're looking at people or listening to people and trying to determine whether they're lying or telling the truth. And I'm going to talk briefly about both of them. I realize I've been a little bit slow. Sorry, Padraig. So I wanted to talk to you about polygraphs, because polygraphs are the sort of main deception detectors out there. Some people even just call them lie detectors, particularly on bad television shows that I'm sure you've never watched. And what a polygraph does, a polygraph is basically just a multi-measure, and it measures a series of things. And the most common ones it measures are your heart rate, your sweat rate, so how much you're sweating, and your breathing rate, so how quickly you're breathing. And all of these are measures of stress. So basically what a polygraph is doing is saying we're measuring how stressed you are, and if you're more stressed, we say that it's more likely that you're lying than if you're less stressed. The thing is, with a polygraph, actually you have to ask people questions, because you could strap somebody in a polygraph in and of themselves, but they'll just sort of fall asleep. You have to sort of catch them in a lie. And one of the difficult things with a polygraph is because it's measuring your breathing rate and your heart rate, when you speak, your breathing rate alters, because in essence, speaking is just really controlled breathing out. You know, you'll notice when you're speaking, you have to stop and breathe in every now and then. So that means you can't just get people in a polygraph and get them to tell you a story, because that will just send the polygraph going off. So if somebody says, well, and then, my Aunt Dorothy arrived, and she had this whole knitted poncho, and it must have taken her weeks. Can't do that in a polygraph. The polygraph will just be sitting there, his breathing is all over the place. So you have to ask yes/no questions. And there's several ways to do that. The control question techniques is basically asking you to say, you ask the question, did you like Aunt Dorothy's home knitted poncho? And then you have to go yes, no. And then a concealed information test is more specifically giving you sort of a multiple choice answer options that aren't yes, no. So you could have questions like, what was your favorite birthday present? Is it Auntie Dorothy's home knitted poncho? And then you have to say yes, no to that. Or was it the really cool music that you received from your best friend? Or was it, and then the options go around that way. So that's how the questions are asked. So do polygraphs work? And there's a couple of issues with them. First of all, they're not perfect, and they're not even 99% perfect. They're much more around sort of 80% perfect. But one of the big problems with polygraphs is what's known as the false positive. So that's when somebody's telling the truth, but it says you're lying. And that's really difficult because, like we talked earlier about how most people want to be honest, how being perceived to be a liar is a bad thing. So if you're telling the truth in a lie detector test and it says you're lying, you're usually in big trouble, either because you're taking the lie detector test for sort of criminal reasons. Let's say you're innocent of a crime, but you take the lie detector test and you fail. You're now in really big problems. Or if you are on, really low quality daytime television shows, and the question is, whether you've had, a child outside marriage or whatever it is. If it's saying that you're lying when you're telling the truth, there's usually very serious consequences. And the polygraph is particularly liable to do that. So when it's wrong, it's often wrong because it's declaring somebody who's telling the truth as a liar. Not good. There's also relatively easy countermeasures against it. So if you practice a little bit, and there are videos on YouTube, I won't link you to them, but there are videos on YouTube, you can practice looking at how, sort of making the polygraph believe that you're lying, making the polygraph believe that you're telling the truth when you're lying. The trick, by the way, isn't to try and look as truthful as possible. The trick is to try and look really, really stressed on all the questions, because then the polygraph will just go, this is a really stressed person, and we can't sort of work with that. There's a good chance that if you're working with a good polygraph examiner, that they'll figure out that you're doing that, but at least they can't tell that you're lying. But because of these easy countermeasures and because you can practice for it, polygraphs are less accurate on people who know that they're going to be tested. And people who know that they're going to be tested are probably an unusual group of people. Because, I've never tried to teach myself how to be a polygraph because I'm assuming that I'll never have to be in a situation where I'm going to be in a polygraph. So if people are going to the trouble to learn how to do it, then they're probably a bit dodgy to start with. So that's not a nice feature of the polygraph test. Polygraphs can't be used in UK courts because they're considered not reliable enough. However, they are used in the probation service. So if you've been convicted of a crime and you're going out, you've come to the end of your sentence and you're going sort of back into the community, you'll be on probation, you'll be on license. And they can use lie detectors in the conversations that you have with your probation officer about how you're doing. And there was actually some talk earlier this year after a terrorist attack that would be increased so that more people on probation would be using or would be subject to lie detector tests. And these tests have been studied directly about how useful these lie detector tests are for the probation service. And that research by Gannon and her colleagues did find that it was useful for probation officers, but not so much because it was the lie detectors were very good at detecting lies. To be honest, in that study, they didn't know whether the polygraph was good at detecting lies because they didn't know whether the probation people were telling the truth or not. I mean, if the probation service had already known whether the offenders were telling the truth or lying, they wouldn't have needed lie detector tests. So there was no what we call ground truth. We don't know what the truth really was. But what Gannon and her colleagues found, and what the probation service found so useful, was that offenders who were taking lie detector tests and failing lie detector tests were more likely to confess to things. So what they were really doing was using a lie detector test like a mouth of truth. And I'm not sure whether you know, this is the mouth of truth. It's in Italy. It's a cover. It has this hole where the mouth is. And the story goes, if you stick your hand in, you tell a lie, the mouth will bite your fingers off. Well, that's probably not a story you can tell most adults. But it works very well on 6-year-olds. So if you get a 6-year-old and you want to know whether this 6-year-old is lying, you tell them about the mouth of truth, you get them to stick their hand in, and you get them to repeat their lie. If your 6-year-old is willing to do that, it's probably the truth. If your 6-year-old is like, no, you know your 6-year-old was lying. And in a certain way, that's what the probation service is doing with polygraphs. They're not using it to see whether somebody's lying. They're using it to see whether someone is willing to take it, willing to repeat their statement while they're taking it, and whether. And I'm sure that that's a very useful thing for the probation service to have. But that doesn't make the polygraph a lie detector. It makes the polygraph a way to put psychological pressure on people who you want to tell you things. Not exactly the same thing. So as the last thing, I want to talk a little bit about cues. So cues is when we sort of look at people's statements, either what they say, so their verbal statements, the words they use, how they say it, the content of their statement, and non-verbal cues. So this is when what people look like, how they move their body, what they move their face like. And there's a couple of cues that have been studied a lot. Whether they're actually good cues to deception, we don't know. So one of the first main cues that are used, main cues to deception is called detail. And this basically says that when truth tellers speak, they give you more information. They talk in more detail than liars. And this is probably just because when you are asked a question and you're telling the truth, you can remember the answer. You can think about it. You can tick back in your mind and think up that kind of detail. If you're lying, you have to make that detail up. And not only do you have to make that detail up, you have to remember it in case it comes back later. You can't just make something up and then forget about it. You have to keep track of it because you have to remember what's going on. And that's quite difficult. That's what we would call cognitively loading. And because it's quite difficult, liars tend not to do it, or they do less of it. And this means that truth tellers tend to have more detail in their statements than liars. Truth tellers also tend to have more plausible statements than liars, which sort of makes sense because if something, I mean, obviously it's the case that sometimes the truth is really implausible. Sometimes really strange things happen. But most of the time, most things that happen are really boring and plausible. But if you're lying, you can make all sorts of stuff up, really implausible stuff. So on average, liars are less plausible than truth tellers. I mean, obviously good liars think about this and tell plausible lies, but you know, not all liars are good liars. And there's also a lot of research on what we might call linguistic cues. So this is not just looking at what people are saying, but how they're saying, how many verbs they're using, how many pronouns they're using, how often they're breaking, how often they say something like, I'm not going to go into that much detail about it because there's all of the work there is a little bit new and it's a little bit iffy, and there's a lot of work being done in that with now fake news. So people are trying to sort of build these software programs that will analyze a statement like a tweet or something. They would analyze the tweet and say this tweet is likely to be true or this tweet is likely to be false based on the words they used. It's not quite working as well as we need it to yet, but lots of psychologists doing lots of work on it. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about are non-verbal cues. So this is where people look at what people move like, what people do. Because if you ask normal people, how can you tell when somebody's lying? They almost always mention the same cue, eye contact. People believe that when people are lying to them, they're going to look away, they're not going to look at their face. And there is some reason to think that that might be true, because looking someone in the face can be really confronting, can be really difficult. So when we're ashamed of ourselves, we might look away from someone. If we're lying to them, we might be ashamed of ourselves, so we might look away. The problem is, because so many believe that eye contact is important, lots of liars will make eye contact deliberately in order to look more convincing. So it isn't always a good cue, because so many people believe in it, so many liars know that they have to maintain eye contact. Sometimes liars even maintain too much eye contact, and then it looks really creepy if they're just sort of staring in your face the entire time. And lots of research has been done on sort of whether liars move their hands differently or more or less, or whether they hold their body differently or more or less. But there has been some rather inconsistent results there. So it seems to be that some people or some liars behave differently than others. I'm going to end here. Thank you all very much for listening to me. Presuming you're all still listening to me, I must say this was my first sort of talk like this, so I'm a little bit like, oh, I hope you're still there. But Drake, are there questions coming in through the Q&A?
Hello. Yeah, thanks very much, Lara. I really enjoyed that.
Sorry for being late. I went on for too long.
Oh, no, it's all right. So yeah, there's several questions come in, actually, some really good ones. So if I ask them of you, and then you can answer as many as you can as quickly as possible. That sounds good?
I'm not good with quickly.
Well, let's see how many we get through before the hour's up then. So first of all, Beth asked about how psychologists define lies. Mm-hmm. So do psychologists define lies in terms of lies of omission as well as lies of commission? So for example, and I don't think this relates to you on the video in particular, but if you don't tell someone they've got food around their mouths, does that count as a lie in these studies of, how often people lie? So
under Vrij's definition, yes, that's a lie, because a lie is an action to give somebody else a belief that you believe to be untrue. So if you think they have food and you think that they would want to know that, not telling them is a lie. Mm-hmm. Legally, that is not necessarily the case unless not telling them would risk their lives. So most countries have a rule that says, you have to act if someone is in direct danger. But if they're not in direct danger, then you don't have to tell them things. So then omissions aren't lies as such, or you can't be published. But if you think about, the old-fashioned movie, if you're going to be a witness and you put your hand on the Bible and you're swearing, you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So you can't hold stuff back if you know that the other person wanted to know it. So if I may quote the classic example of Bill Clinton when he was, under oath, and they asked whether he had the question was, are you having a relationship with Monica Lewinsky? And he said no. And by the time he was saying that, it was true. They had broken up some time ago. And later people tried to argue that he had lied, that he'd perjured himself because he had a relationship with Miss Lewinsky, and that was quite obvious that the prosecutor intended that in the question. But Bill Clinton argued successfully, well, that's not what he asked. He didn't ask it, therefore I didn't lie. But I would sort of go with Clinton's detractor saying he did lie. He knew that was what the prosecutor meant. He lied by omission. But he was acquitted in Senate, so. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yeah, Olivia asked the same question there, so it's obviously something on people's minds. There's lots of questions about cues for lies. So are there any consistencies at all in the research on cues to spot lies? So Dana Turner asked that.
So the most consistent cue is detail. So it does really seem to be the case that on average, when people are talking about stuff they know, truth tellers will give you more detail. So if somebody is being deliberately vague, that is a good sign that they're lying. And the nice thing about that is that you can probe people. So if you think somebody's being really vague and you think they might be lying, just ask them to provide more detail. If they're telling the truth, they have another opportunity to give you more detail, because some people are just vague. And if they're lying, they're going to now be stuck. So now they can either make something up, which is really difficult, which means they might give you more cues to deception, or they might just break down and tell you they're lying, which does sometimes happen.
Mm-hmm. And these cues to lying again, could Charlotte wants to know, maybe she's moving on to poker later on, but she wonders whether non-verbal cues can be used for tells in gambling and poker.
So there's been a lot of research in this field, obviously because there's money in that field. If you don't know someone, it's very, very difficult, especially in a situation like poker, where some people might fake ticks. So some people in poker specifically, they look at people's eyes and the pupil dilation, because normally when we see something we like, our pupils dilate a little bit. It's almost like your body wants to see it better. So sometimes with poker, people look at that because they like look at the cards, and if they're good cards, their eyes will dilate a bit. But that's so difficult to see when you're just sitting across the table from somebody, because you can't really put your head in their face going, oh, your eyes a little bit bigger there. And if you don't know somebody, if you don't know what they normally look like, it's really, really difficult. And then in poker, people are often, people are trying to control this as well. So I've studied lying for the last 10 years, and I'm still a horrible poker player.
There's lots of questions too about individual differences in lying. So, gender differences. Are male or females better liars? Can they get away with it more, for instance?
People have studied this, and we have no evidence that there's a difference in man and women. The only difference that has been found is that women are more likely to tell these good lies. So, women are more likely to go, of course your bum looks fine in that, and then men are more likely to go, no, you need to change those trousers, which doesn't necessarily get men, a better place in social situations.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's no real difference that we've been able to find.
Yes, but it does relate to false belief, how good someone is at lying. Does it also relate to empathy, Charlotte was asking? And if so, does that relate to children with autism and their ability to lie, to deceive?
So that's a good question. I don't know of any direct research off the top of my head that's looking into that. I do know that deception can be delayed in children with autism, which is likely because they're delayed in their understanding of false beliefs. So if you don't know that other people have their own minds, it becomes more difficult to think about. Even the idea that you could deceive somebody become harder, even if people with autistic spectrum disorder can, in essence, be trained to say certain things. And many people in therapy for autism spectrum disorder are, in fact, trained to lie better.
Uh-huh.
But whether that's directly related to empathy, I don't know. I would expect that people who are more empathic are more likely to tell these good lies, and they might be less likely to tell bad lies because they'll feel worse for the other person. But whether they'd be more convincing if they did lie, I don't know. I know that there is research on it. I just don't know off the top of my head what it found.
Mm-hmm. And Olivia is also wondering about individual differences. So for those non-verbal cues to deception, or to whether someone is lying, how does that relate to people's personality? So, for example, she asks, someone with more anxiety may move more or have less eye contact. So is it possible to separate out those personality variables from the deception cues? And
that is one of the reasons why the deception cues are so hard to work, because different people, either because they have different personalities or because they have a different background or they have different educations, they show their nonverbal behavior so differently that it's really difficult to get consistent deception fact across that. So if somebody is, not making any eye contact, is that because they're lying, or is that because they have a mild form of autism spectrum disorder? There's so much individual difference in people's nonverbal behavior. It's really difficult to put And even if deception is influencing their nonverbal behavior, it's really difficult to separate those things out. And that's what makes the lie detection so difficult.
Do you know anything about the research on autism? So there was another question about those with autism being less inclined to commit white lies, for instance. And does that relate to false belief skills too?
Yes, I would say so. I know a little bit about this, partly due to a colleague, Callum Hartley, who studies autism spectrum disorder, and we've discussed this on occasion. We really want to do a study looking at deception in autism spectrum disorder. We've got it all planned. We just never had the opportunity to run it. So yeah, so there is some literature that suggests that people with autism spectrum disorder tell less white lies, partly because their false belief is lower. So partly because they don't realize that they would hurt somebody by telling them the truth. And that makes it more difficult for people with autism spectrum disorder to build social relationship. And that's partly because as a society, we give people such mixed messages. So at the same time, we say people, it's important that you're honest, it's important that you tell the truth. And then in reality, in lots of situations, you just have to lie. It just makes your life so much easier. So, and that's a complexity that's difficult to understand for people with autism spectrum disorder. To be honest, it's just really difficult. It's remarkable that so many people sort of do it so well. Yeah.
Several questions about children and deception as well. So Dida or Dida asks, so as children get older, they start telling more and better lies, but do they also increase in their ability to realize they're being lied to?
Should do. I would very much expect that to be the case, but I can't think of a single study that proves it. This is partly, there's a bit of an ethics there. Obviously, when we study children, we have to sort of, it's about ethics. We have to be nice. We can't hurt them. We can't harm them in any way. And lying to them could possibly harm them. Therefore, I think it'd be difficult to run a study that's both ethical, that's looking at this. But I would expect children getting better. And just take the simple example of Santa Claus. You can convince most 4-year-olds that Santa Claus exists, and most 9-year-olds go, that sounds really implausible. But whether that's because they become better at looking at you and detecting your lies, or whether it's just that they know more about, men with white beards who don't fit through the chimney, I don't know. They might just have a better sense of what's plausible and what isn't.
Yeah. This is there's another really good but tough question about children. So Catherine is wondering about, in terms of ability to lie, is that related to the number of siblings that children have? So how do those, those peer relationships among children affect their, affect their ability to deceive?
So I would imagine, I don't know the research on, I would imagine that having more social contact is good. We do know that the stricter adults are around a child, the better the child will lie. So if a child goes to a very strict school where they will be punished harshly for any sort of infraction, they will lie better and more convincingly than if they go to a more lenient school where any infraction will be dealt with by discussion and things like that. So there is very much the case that children who need to lie convincingly do so more convincingly. So you are training a child. So partly an argument not to punish children too harshly if you find they're lying, because they'll just get better at it.
Lovely. So Ken was interested in children as well, and so what benefit there might be to building up those skills of false belief and ability to lie in children.
Well, the obvious benefit is that having that false belief skills, having that understanding of what other people are thinking, will help you make friends, will help you have positive relationships with other people. And lying, although it can be problematic behavior in children, so if children lie too often or in difficult situations, it can be a problem, and it can be a sign of maldevelopment, of malfunction. That sounds strange. It can be a sign that something's wrong with them. But at the normal end of the spectrum, It is just something that a child will need to get on well with their peers and their friends and their teachers and their other family members. Certainly, lying by omission, i.e. the knowledge of when to keep your mouth shut, is a very good skill to have. You've all had the situation where that 4-year-old just opened their mouth and said just the wrong thing at just the wrong time, where you're like, yeah, you should have just lied there.
Mm-hmm. Rather topically, there are several questions really about politicians and political leaders as well. So why is it, do you think, that politicians, political leaders are allowed to get away with lies, if some of them ever do, and aren't really punished for doing that?
Oh, I'm just trying to think how to answer this without being very, very rude. Okay, I'm going to say something that's not entirely backed up by research. I'm speaking partly from my own point of view. There is some evidence that suggests that the more powerful someone is, the worse behaved they are. And the more powerful someone is, the less they care about other people, because their power sort of shields them from social relationships. If you're not very powerful, you have to have friends. If you're really powerful, you no longer need friends. And that means that some of the social kindness, the social politeness that unpowerful people need in order to get through their life in a comfortable way isn't necessary for people who are powerful, for people who are rich, for people who have social power. And that means that some of the things that would be really detrimental to sort of lower power person, so if someone who's, you know, a regular person lied a lot and got caught a lot, soon they'd have the reputation of being a liar and people wouldn't work with them. But if someone is I'm going to just be rude and say, if someone is prime minister, they can't go away from him. Like if there's a local plumber and he cheats people, you're going to go, well, I'm not hiring him anymore. You know, even a single rumor, you know, one WhatsApp message saying, you know, that plumber, he cheated, a friend of a friend would be like, well, probably not going to hire that plumber, I'll find another plumber. But it's not that easy to get another prime minister. We can't just go, well, yesterday, Boris Johnson told a lie. He is no longer the prime minister, because there's a whole power structure surrounding the prime minister. And the thing is, even if we were to replace the prime minister, he'd be replaced by another powerful person. And that powerful person also has sort of no longer that need for that sort of social honesty, because we're not going to go, you know what, Boris Johnson, you're out. Catherine Hopkins, just up the street, lovely lady, she's the next prime minister. The next prime minister is going to be, I don't know, the man who's currently the Minister for Foreign Affairs or the Shadow Minister for Health or something like that. And they're also in that position. So this is where sort of the rules for some aren't the same as the rules for others.
Yeah, so the power relations have an influence of the consequences of lying. But do you think that frequent lying has a psychological impact on the liar? So if you lie, does that encourage you or discourage you more to lie in the future?
I think if you lie a lot and you get away with it, this will encourage you to do more lying. You'll get more confident at it and you'll do more of it. Whether that's a positive or a negative probably depends on whether what the lie is. Was the lie a positive lie to start with? So think about, let's say you have kids. You know, sometimes with kids, life is easier if you lie. You know, you introduce them to Santa Claus, and then if you pass that, you introduce them to the Easter Bunny, you know, and then you start telling them that spinach is good for you. You know, spinach is good for you, but it won't make you, you know, Popeye. You know, so sort of the lies come in. And if you're good at it, you'll do it more, and then you could get into this sort of positive thing where you just don't hurt people because you're really a really convincing sort of smooth liar. These people are sometimes known in literature as the smooth operators. But I think the reverse is also true. If you're telling lies for selfish reasons and you get away with it, you'll start telling more and more often. And I think it'll become more and more normal. So you sort of lose that sense of honesty, and at some point you're just a habitual liar. And then getting back can be really difficult. So let's say you've been a politician, you know, and you've got all of that experience and you've done all of that lying, and then suddenly you sort of quit your job and you become an accountant, you know. I think that it becomes really tempting to say, oh, you know, when I was a politician, I could get away with all of these lies. Now I'm an accountant, I really should be honest, but, you know, I could just fiddle this and I probably wouldn't find out. I think that would be tempting. I think it'd be difficult to get back. But this is my own opinion. I don't have any actual research on this.
Mm-hmm. And do you know anything about the history of the social acceptability of lying, whether that changes across time and within a culture or differs between different cultures?
There is research into this, and all cultures and all times seem to put a premium on honesty. So almost all cultures, both current and past, seem to say honesty important, lying is bad. But there has been movement on this. So the difference between how bad lying is different between different cultures. And some cultures will also make exceptions for particular situations. So some cultures say, well, lying is bad, but not if you're saying thank you to somebody, because saying thank you is really important, even if you don't believe it. I mean, famously, the Romans said that you had to worship their gods. You didn't have to believe in their gods, but you did have to worship them. We don't care if you believe it, as long as you do it. So there is some variable in certain situations. I mean, famously, Machiavelli writes The Prince that says, you know, you must lie. Lying is the only way you're going to get somewhere. I mean, so yeah, there is some difference, but almost all cultures say that lying is bad. There's very few. Can't think of a single culture or a single time people said, you know, lying, we should do more of that.
Mm-hmm. And there's some questions on aging, effects of aging on lying as well. So don't know if you can give some more insight into this. So someone asks, as we get older, our locus of control becomes more external. So does locus of control play a part in the amount of times that we lie, given that there are these age differences in people's retrospective memory of how often they lie?
I don't know. It's a good question, and I want to study it, and I'm going to write it down, and I might actually study it, because I am looking, this is one of the strands of my research, I'm looking at aging. So I've got a PhD student, she's, you know, that decline that we mentioned, she's trying to look at the reason for that decline, and I'm doing some research on that as well. And Lancaster University has a panel for all the participants who want to take part in research, so they've been very helpful on that. And we do think that some of that decline is to do with sort of personal confidence, where younger people might feel, well, I have to lie now, otherwise they think I'm rude. And more older people going, well, if they think I'm rude, they think I'm rude, but I'm not going to pretend, I'm not going to lie to them. But whether that's linked to their locus of control, I don't know. It is a great question, and one day I'll find out.
Mm-hmm. Probably time for just one more question now. So Paulina was also interested in effects of aging. So do the types of lies that people tell change with age? So for instance, do lies become more serious with age? So a child might lie about not having eaten some sweets. That happened in my household today. Whereas adults, if they tell a lie, they can have much more serious consequences.
I might slightly disagree with that question, because to us, a child lying about the sweets doesn't sound very important, but to the child, that might be very important. And I think it's important that you sort of organize the seriousness of lie by the person who speaks it, rather than by what other people think about it. We do know, or at least some of the sort of the older adults that participated in my study, that the older they get, the bigger the proportion of good lies become. So older adults seem to be less inclined to tell selfish lies, but have we been kicked out? Everything good?
No, you're still there. Okay.
And so the sort of the good lies sort of increase a bit. That older adults are sort of more willing to, well. So personally, I think it's that their bad lies are declining rather than that they're telling more good lies. But it could be the case that they're just telling loads of good lies just because they've become nicer over the years. So like, that was a great poncho. So so there does seem to be a little bit of a change where there's less, but that might just be because, I mean, older adults don't go around robbing banks much either. I mean, every now and then, but not that rarely. So they're not committing fraud as much either. There's movement there, uncertainty there.
Great, thank you so much, Lara. That's really interesting. So there are lots of questions that we haven't managed to get through, unfortunately. Would it be okay if people send messages to you for anything to follow up on this?
Yeah, but is my email address available? if I type my email address in my slide and then people can write to me?
You can try, or I mean, they can visit the Department of Psychology web pages at Lancaster to find you.
Yes, and my name is on the first slide, and I am the only lara warmelink in the entire world. So if you Google me, you get my department web page, and then you can email me. My email address is there. So you're now happy to field any emails if you're interested.
That's terrific. Thanks very much. We're meeting here every Tuesday at 7:30 for the next few weeks. You should be able to see the web address for the full schedule here. And so next Tuesday, for instance, at this time, Dr. Callum Hartley is going to be talking about children's understanding of ownership. We'd be delighted if you could join us. So Lara, thanks very much on behalf of all the attendees and on behalf of our department. Really appreciate it. Okay, till next week. Bye now.
Bye now.